Oil and gas are produced literally every second of every day. They're combusted and produces CO2. So what we're doing as a team of researchers is evaluating the best options for putting that CO2 back into the ground.
Carbon storage is really critical for meeting national and international goals such as the Paris Accord. The reason for this is we are growing a renewable resource and energy base in this country, but there are substantial issues that make that a slow process. What you find with renewable energy is that you don't have the storage capacity to fully utilize those resources. This means that we must have stable baseload power in the United States while also reducing carbon dioxide emissions and hopefully eventually getting to net zero or even negative emissions within the country. And we have to do this in a generation. And we're going to get there, and we're going to discover these battery and storage technologies, but in the meantime, we have to deal with carbon with the technologies that we have in hand. That's where the CUSP and these other regional initiatives really come into play.
The Carbon Utilization and Storage Partnership, or CUSP for short, a team of geological surveys, the major universities, national labs, individual researchers, consultants, are the best people in those 14 states, covering the entire western United States. Our goal is to understand fundamentally those rock properties, those behaviors, how fluids behave in the subsurface, and how injection of carbon dioxide might influence not just this package of rock, but all of the rocks surrounding it all the way up to the land surface.
So the primary goal of the CUSP and how we fit into this whole equation is we are building not just a physical infrastructure of projects that are storing carbon. We're helping companies with permitting, helping them understand the tax code, helping them get into commercializing their capture of CO2 and putting it into the ground.
We're sitting in the Utah Core Research Center. It's the region's largest repository for core and cuttings from the state of Utah and some of the surrounding states. We have core from about 1,500 wells, about 400,000 feet of core, or maybe 75 miles. We have cuttings from about 5,500 wells, about 57 million feet of subsurface data, represents about 11,000 miles.
A lot of the drill core you see in this core facility is focused on oil and gas reservoirs. Those same oil and gas reservoirs, once the majority of the oil and gas has been extracted by the companies, it is still a reservoir. At that point, it can potentially be used for storing vast amounts of CO2.
So we're looking for reservoirs that have high porosity, high permeability, that can accept large volumes of carbon dioxide. We're also looking for a sufficient seal rock. So not only are we interested in the reservoir itself, but also the sealing rocks to be able to store that carbon over time and not let it leak out to the surface.
I build reservoir models, and so what we have here is my raw data that I use, whether it's the porosity or the permeability. They can give me that information and I put that into my modeling. The models are critical in both defining the area where you start to look, as well as then modeling that leakage itself and looking at if we had leakage conditions, how bad would that leakage be?
We have a lot of experience in making sure that it not only goes into the ground, but it also stays in the ground. It doesn't come back out. But even if it leaked 10%, that means 90% is still stored, and that's CO2 that's not in the atmosphere. And I think that that's a really critical way to think about it. You have to think about it as the end goal is less CO2 to the atmosphere.
The technology of carbon sequestration is necessary, and it does have associated with it some risks.
Citizens are concerned, as they should be, concerned about what will happen if CO2, carbon dioxide, is injected deep into the earth.
No geologic carbon sequestration operation has ever induced a medium or large scale earthquake. It just hasn't happened. Already in the carbon sequestration industry, we are using the traffic light system. And so what a traffic light system is you listen for what's going on in the earth. You determine whether you're operating in a safe operating environment, which is a green light. Is it an intermediate operating environment, a yellow light, or have you exceeded some threshold of magnitude of earthquake or quantity of earthquakes that indicates you need to stop your injection entirely? Perhaps that's a reason why there have been no earthquakes so far.
Eventually, to be able to make a dent in the whole climate change equation, we will have to look at literally gigatons of CO2 on a yearly basis. And to be able to do that, we need large-scale operations. The companies that have successfully done that are the oil and gas companies. They have the expertise in understanding the formations into which carbon dioxide would go, understand the technology for creating an infrastructure for taking large amounts of CO2 and putting it underground. And the oil industry brings that capacity and capability to the table.
In the CUSP, we're not looking at just oil companies. They are a major source of CO2, also a major potential sink for CO2. You can put it into their depleted oil reservoirs, and a lot of the salient aquifers that you can use for storage are also associated with those same oil fields.
CUSP is absolutely critical because they've been doing great carbon capture and sequestration research for over 20 years here at the University of Utah, as well as many other places around the country. The research had gotten quite a bit ahead of the policy. They have proven that it's technically viable. So we're just going to work on the political and the economic viability. And here in Utah, we're really leading the way. We're actually working on legislation right now. So when developing successful carbon capture and sequestration legislation, you really need to look at all the stakeholders that are going to be involved in it. And with carbon sequestration, the type of stakeholders that are going to be involved is pretty much everyone. What we've done here in Utah is we created a working group which includes just all these different stakeholders, and it includes industry. We're also including regulators, environmentalists. We're including a variety of community voices to make sure that the solutions we come up with and the legislation that's created, that it gets enough support, that people feel comfortable with it, and that it can get widespread support through the legislature.
We're fighting time. Yeah, we are truly fighting time. How much can you change how fast? We're teaching companies how to get into carbon storage. This enables us to continue using some of our traditional power sources and non-traditional as we switch to hydrogen while we make this transition, and while we develop the battery storage technology, and while we develop a huge renewable infrastructure that we need to combat the problem into the next century. But we have the problem in this century. I believe that this is the solution that we need right now. Maybe it's not the solution we need in 2 generations, but to get to where we need to be in that time, this is how we can do it.